All right, this is lecture 1 for the Cold War. Today we're going to talk about the start of the Cold War. First off, we need to know that Truman takes over as president when FDR dies in April of 1945 during World War II. We know that Truman is the man that eventually decides to drop the atomic bomb. Kind of ironic that he doesn't really know about the Manhattan Project. So when he steps into office, he realizes that he has more power than he ever once dreamed. Interesting fact is he had served under as VP for just 82 days before becoming president. So we know that he wasn't actually his vice president through FDR's whole time in office. The U.S. and the USSR allies becoming enemies. So during World War II, we know that the Russians were our allies during the war after the Nazis turned their backs on them, and we made some pacts with them, but following the war, we kind of emerged as both becoming superpowers, and we are doing this in different ways. So we have different economic systems, we have ideological differences, and we have growing mutual suspicions. We have an atomic bomb, they're building one. We may feel they're spying on us. So there's a lot of things that make us suspicious, especially because we have different ways of thinking. All right, so we're going to talk about some things in review here. So the Yalta Conference, it's the final meeting of the Big Three before FDR passes. And we're going to try to get some stuff talked about here. So what we do under the Yalta is we create the United Nations. We demand for Germany's unconditional surrender. And then we know what we're going to do with Germany post-war. So post-war, we're going to split them into 4 zones of occupation given to the victors. And then Stalin agreed to enter the war against Japan. And then we're going to agree on the status of Poland, and that's going to be Russia's. And then we want to demilitarize Germany. But we want to try to make a way so that they're not going to totally collapse like they did back after World War I. So we're also going to have another conference. This is going to be the Potsdam Conference. The Potsdam Conference between Truman, Stalin, Churchill, and later Attlee. He's from England. Basically, they restated the agreement to partition Germany. They agreed to prosecute war criminals, and was the Nuremberg trials. And we're going to set the boundary line of Poland, and then we're going to occupy parts of Germany. Truman had kind of hinted at the atomic bomb to Stalin, but he doesn't really tell him. He says that we have a powerful new weapon, and Stalin was really unimpressed. All right, so we have something called the Soviet bloc. So following the war and the dropping of the bomb, the Soviet Union starts to kind of not invade, but they start to take over different satellites, is what we call them. So they felt that by controlling satellite nations, they could stop future Western invasions. And if you see where these satellite nations are located here, they're in between the Soviet Union and Western Europe. So if there was going to be any fighting, they would be fought in these countries as opposed to on their home soil. Okay, the communist government is installed in much of Central and Eastern Europe. So these are going to become communist countries here in the middle. The Iron Curtain. Okay, the Iron Curtain was popularized by Churchill's speech in 1946. People didn't like the speech because he actually is showing the divide between the West and the East, and that's not a good thing to do, to basically announce that you're an enemy of someone else. So he's basically announcing to the world that the Soviets are enemies with America and England, and there is like a rivalry that's created here, and Stalin considers this to be a call to war. So he's basically calling this the divide between the Western Europe and that Soviet bloc that I just talked about. All right, containment is the first suggested by George Kennan in something called the Long Telegram, and it's made public by Foreign Affairs article. Kennan asserted that the goal of the U.S. should be to contain communism within its present borders. So you can kind of think of this rivalry that's created between the Soviet Union and the United States as like kind of gang warfare, and we're trying to like gather as many people on our side as possible. And we're saying that it's really, really important for us to make sure that communism stays where it is. That's containing it. We're not going to shut it out, but we are going to contain it. And we also want to spread democracy, so we can have as many people on our side of the fight as possible, in order to, be successful and make the world safe. Truman backs this idea up, and he creates something called the Truman Doctrine, and it's designed to contain communism. Truman announces that he would give economic aid to Greece and Turkey in order to help them fight off against communist countries. So if nations were trying to fight communism, then he would support them. So this extended anywhere aid was given to support a non-communist government. And for the first time, containment becomes our national policy. And the next thing is the Marshall Plan. The Western Europe struggled to revive after the war, and we needed to have trading partners across the world in order for our economy to thrive. So we gave millions of dollars to other countries. And actually, if you sum it all up, we end up giving $13 billion in order to help these other countries rebuild. Marshall Plan proposes aid to all European nations to rebuild, and this would be good for the United States because now we can trade because these economies are back up on their feet. All right, so we're going into Berlin, and if you look at Germany, we've partitioned it, and the Soviet Union has the eastern half, we have the western half, basically, and we're kind of looking at the two economies, and one is thriving, one is struggling. Our capitalistic side is thriving, the communist side is struggling, and Berlin is located completely in the Soviet zone. So Berlin's here, and here's the Soviet zone, so it's really difficult for us to get supplies to them. Because we own half of what we own West Berlin because it's the capital. So we start to aid Berlin, and the Soviet Union gets upset at us. So they start closing off all the highways and railways to the cities because they're all located in the Soviet zone. They're basically trying to starve us out so that we'll give them Berlin. So what we do is we end up flying our supplies into them. So it's the code name for it is called Operation Vittles. And we start to fly in supplies. There's 277,000 flights that go through and start to resupply. And it shows, the positive side of the United States, and it shows the negative side of the Soviet Union, the fact that they're willing to try to starve out these people in order to prove a political point. And it shows us as crusaders. And there's some planes that were carrying candy. Many of these German people, or the kids, would call them raisin bombers. And this really helped to solidify an alliance between the Germans and the Americans. And then we finally, with the partition of Germany, so you can kind of see the map here, and it shows really what's going on. So the western part of Germany becomes Federal Republic of Germany, in May of 1949, and the eastern part of Germany becomes the Democratic Republic. And Berlin lay entirely within that, and you can see the partition of Berlin in there as well. And finally, we're going to talk about NATO and the Warsaw Pact. NATO still exists today. NATO is kind of a peacekeeping operation that we have. It's called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. There's 12 original member states in Mutual Defense Alliance. There's now 26 states. We basically understood that we needed assistance in fighting against the USSR, and we also needed to help other countries from falling to the USSR. So we helped to create NATO, and it becomes a really good defense against attack, because if any NATO nation is attacked, it is mandatory that all other nations of NATO attack back and retaliate and come to the aid. So it is a really good deterrent against the Soviets attacking any more nations. So we wanted to get as many nations around the USSR to become a part of NATO as possible. In response, the Soviet Union creates the Warsaw Pact, and it is a way for the Soviet Union to kind of gang up as well. The problem is, the Soviet Union never invaded any NATO nation, but it did invade two of the nations within the Warsaw Pact, which is Hungary and Czechoslovakia. So it kind of shows, again, that the Soviet Union was not really looking out for the best interests of the people around it. All right, and that's the intro to the Cold War. Thank you.